parents go on vacation together somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog. Like it, I am able to check in on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad takes part in this weird golfing competition with his friends. If someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll and as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. My dad won the competition and he brought the doll home before he left. I am not at all scared of dolls. I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it. My parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a little while, but when things start to get weird, because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who is in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. I leave the room with the doll still in there, head into my room to send it the photo and think nothing more of it. A few minutes later, I hear a loud bang, which makes me jump. I go to look out into the hallway and my sister's door is shut. Our hallway has no opening windows and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful, a little on edge. I opened her door and I see the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was odd. I picked the doll up and carried it back to my room. That night I'm sleeping in my parents' room to keep an eye on my dog as she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night and see it's around 3 a.m. I glance over at my dog and she's awake too. With her head up, I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too and see that it's open, even though I remember shutting it before to go to bed. I quickly turn on the lamp, jump up and close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenager brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. I get back into bed, scroll on my phone until I fall asleep. I wake up in the morning, as usual, to feed my dog around 6 a.m. It is still dark out. When I go into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor after I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and I am now feeling paranoid. But again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep for a couple of hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound. I quickly got up and ran downstairs. My first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her. But when I got downstairs, I realized the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud it was shaking the counters. It was odd as my dog was just standing in front of the door, staring at it. And she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely Surrey Red Wolf location. Surrey Red Wolf location, Illinois, USA. I have worked within the East Central Illinois area Goodwill for the past year. I'm aware that there are at least 2 ghosts in our building and have interacted with items people gave us out of fear they were haunted. I wanted to buy the items, but there is a rule against this. The first item was a magenta armchair, which was donated by a man who clears the homes of elderly people after they have died or been placed in a retirement home. The families usually take what they want, and they ask the man to take care of everything else. He told me that a family had an uncle pass away in the armchair. It was in fairly good condition, but touching it felt strange. As he left, he joked, saying that the family saw their uncle's shadow around the chair, so they gave it to him to donate. I laughed, telling him I'd let him know if I see anything. I was moving the chair to the furniture storage area and kept seeing a shadow in the corner of my vision. Not even an hour on the sales floor, and the chair was bought after another elderly man sat down, ripped the tag off, and then hobbled over to pay for it. Another item was a medium-sized porcelain doll. The store I work at gets dozens of dolls like it each week, but only this one had something else with it. A rarer and older doll. It was in a protected glass box. I have heartily joked at the family who bought it when I asked, "Is the glass for our protection or the doll's?" To which the mother told me the doll was her grandmother's and was around 90 years old. She went on to say that it had a habit of moving cloth that was covering it. That night, before we closed, I covered the doll to challenge the claim. The next morning, we received a call from the security company saying a motion detector went off in the room where the doll was left. The cloth had been turned roughly 90 degrees around. The last item is just creepy and may have added a ghost to our store. I was off that day the incident happened, so this is just a recollection from the person I talked to. An urn containing ashes was donated in a box of other vases and pottery. As the box with the urn and vases was being moved, my co-worker unfortunately dropped the box. The ashes went everywhere, including onto her. Quickly, staff cleaned the ash the best they could and attempted to contact the family that donated the ashes. Later that day, the urn and around 90% of the ashes were taken away. There has been ghostly activity within the shop. I'm confident I once saw a spirit on the sales floor. Mimics. I'm just gonna explain what mimics are exactly. Mimics are spirits that imitate human voices or other sounds, including animals. There are some people that say you should never acknowledge one. It seems as though they try to lure people into rooms or places, such as forests, by using a voice which is perhaps of someone they trust. This type of paranormal encounter can be distressing and confusing, leading to the person to believe they are hearing or imagining things. This one is called The Apartment. Anonymous. My husband, myself, and our 2 young kids, they were 1 and 3 at the time, had to move to another was in the kitchen feeling confused that he was home so early. I ran through, yet no one was there. This happened regularly. I would often hear his voice calling my name. I went around the other apartments talking with the neighbors. I was concerned that maybe one of them was shouting loudly and I was mistaken. Most worked through the day, and the few that remained were either elderly or women. One night I was awoken by my youngest crying. The kids were sharing a room next to ours. I jumped up as I got to their bedroom door. The crying stopped abruptly. I went in the room. Both of the kids were fast asleep, and there was no sign of them having been crying or disturbed or crying. There was something really unsettling about the place, and I never felt happy there. It felt like there was an overwhelming sadness in the air. And honestly, I began to think that I was going mad, hallucinating and hearing things. We found a place we loved and moved in. On the day we were leaving, one of the elderly gentlemen from the apartment said how he had never mentioned before, as he didn't want to unsettle me. But the apartment we had been living in had bad vibes. He said that no one ever lived there long, and back in the 80s, someone had overdosed in the place and died. I was glad I didn't know the history during the 5 months I was living there. Moving to the house was like a weight had been lifted. We have been here ever since, and there is nothing creepy about this house. I've never heard anyone's voices that weren't there either. Thank goodness. It follows him from house to house. Islix Witch X. Location Spring, Texas, USA. My husband has a spirit attached to him. We call it the Mimic. He was living with roommates before he met me. They went on their honeymoon for 2 weeks and he stayed home alone. He was playing Call of Duty and just lazing around when he heard his female roommate yell, "Hey, come look at this YouTube video I found," followed by laughing. He went in the room, not thinking there was no one there. He's heard my voice talking when I wasn't home. I have heard my mom talking when she wasn't around. My husband's mom has heard me saying something when I was out, and on one occasion, my husband and I both heard our former roommate cursing at his computer. It is extremely confusing. Recently we moved, and my husband, his mom, and myself all heard the same thing and found nothing. It sounded like one of our cats meowing in the guest bathroom room. We knew immediately after talking about it that the Mimic followed us to the new house. The Mimic isn't too scary and it doesn't do anything but sounds, although I believe it's the reason why just me. When I got out of the shower, he wasn't home, and I had this weird gut feeling it wasn't him. When I called him, he told me he hadn't even been home. No one had. Our spirit comes and goes as it pleases, but likes to show up and mess with us sometimes. Something's got my attention. Anonymous. My partner and I moved into a new apartment within the building we lived in before. The apartment we're staying at is in the middle of a long hallway with no doors really close to us. My partner came home really late one night. I was waiting for him in our sitting room, which is in front of the door. He opened the door and greeted me. I thought he had brought a friend with him because as he spoke I could hear somebody calling my name from the hallway over and over again. It sounded like a little girl's voice. I asked my partner if there was anyone else in the hallway or if he could hear my name being called. He didn't hear anything. As soon as the door closed, it was quiet again. Sometime later, when I was alone at night again, I heard that sound. It's what sounded like a dog sniffing the front door and scratching. It scared me senseless. To make it worse, our building has no pet policy, and apartments get inspected regularly for that reason. I don't know who or what it was, but I hate being here alone, especially if it is at night. I was cooking recently and my partner was in the sitting room. Sometimes, when I'm standing in front of the stove, he will come and hug me while I'm cooking. Last night, I found him standing behind me and saw his shadow being cast on the wall in front of me. He seemed quite a bit taller than normal, but I didn't realize straight away. I turned around to catch him off guard, but when I did, there was no one there. I could then hear my partner laughing in the other room. I was freaked out, but said nothing as my partner doesn't believe in the paranormal. The next morning, my partner and I were busy spring cleaning. I was in the bathroom cleaning the sink and he was in the kitchen doing dishes. I heard someone whistle behind me. I ran to my partner and told him what happened, and he said the exact same thing happened to him. He laughed it off, but it freaked me out. My mom's voice was calling me from the woods. Gatorade location. Gator Betrayed, I guess. Location, Florida, USA. I live in Florida, I've never heard of this city. In February, I was walking home after hanging out with some friends. I was completely sober and in my right mind. I have never been afraid to walk alone in the dark. I'm quite tall and intimidating, looking from a distance, and I always bring a pocket knife when I know I'll be walking in the dark. As I walked by some woods, on the way back to my house, I heard my mother's voice. Gabriel, help! Gabriel, help! I immediately recognized her voice and turned to look into the woods. She kept calling my name over and over. I couldn't see anything. It was too dark, too far to see through the trees, but I could clearly hear her voice from within the woods. Mom, I called back, heading towards the woods. She sounded like she was in trouble and scared. I assumed that she had gone for a run like she did every night and somehow got lost in the woods. Then I realized it couldn't be her. She sister so she could go on a run. I stopped dead in my tracks and called my mom's phone. The voice in the woods was still shouting my name and getting more frantic by the second. She picked up and I immediately asked her if she was in the woods. She said that she was home with my little sister. As she said she was home, her voice stopped calling my name from inside the woods. I was overcome with a wave of dread and fear that I had never felt before. Something in the woods was trying to lure me in using my mother's voice. And it threw my full name, not just my nickname, which made things even scarier. The only person who calls me Gabriel is my mom. I immediately turned and ran faster than I'd ever run before. Back home, I opened the door and there was my mom sitting on the couch with my sister. I would think this was some sort of prank, but my mom isn't one for pranks. And even if she was, there is no way she could have made it home before me and without me seeing her. I did tell my mom what I heard. She doubted me at first, but I was still able to convince her I was serious. She promised to not run through those woods anymore and not to run at night. The old farmstead, C.J. Blake, location, Michigan, USA. We lived on an old farm at the time, and I was home alone. I was preparing to leave for work as a realtor. I was rearranging for 4 sale signs in the trunk of my car, trying to make them fit and struggling to do so, when I heard somebody yell, "Mom!" It sounded like one of my kids would if they were looking to ask me something. Without thinking, I lifted my head out of the trunk in frustration because of my struggle and yelled, "What?" Then it hit me that my husband had already left for work and all of my kids had gone to school. I slammed the trunk lid and got in the car and left. We had a few minor creepy moments around the old farm, like lights coming on in the barn loft, and we frequently heard knocks on the door. One day, the knocking on the door happened when my parents were over having coffee. My mom said, "Oh, someone is here." I replied, "No, this happens all the time, but I'll go check." Sure enough, no one at the door was at the back door or at the front. We just got used to it. My mom called my name, Sunny Ray, location Western Kentucky, USA. I lived with my parents in a pretty crappy apartment that frequently had weird happenings. One night I was walking into the kitchen, which was down a little tiny hallway from the living room, with a bathroom in between. My mom was in the living room as I walked through the hall and past the bathroom. I heard my mom say my name. I took a couple steps backwards and poked my head around the corner and said, "Yeah." She gave me a puzzled look and just said, "What?" I told her I heard her say my name, and she said, "I didn't say anything, but I heard you." She replied, "You didn't hear me." It was confusing as someone clearly said my name. I still occasionally feel like something is watching me, but I've never heard it again. My brother's voice. Avi, Benson, location, USA. My family and I live out in the middle of nowhere, so that means we don't have neighbors. My brother and I would go down to the barn and feed the animals every day. One day I had gone down months, I refused to go down to the barn without knowing my brother was actually leaving the house with me. I have not had any more encounters like that again. Every once in a while, I can still hear my brother's voice calling for me when he is not home. Something copied my mother. Kevin, location, the Philippines. I was in the 4th grade and my mother used to work in Manila, which was a long commute. The traffic got so bad at the time to the point that when she left work at 9 p.m., she would arrive home at midnight or as late as 1 a.m. That is a long commute. One night, my mom called from work. She asked me if I could wait up for her because she had forgotten her keys. Of course, I said yes, as my sister was already sleeping. I passed the time watching TV in my room upstairs. Around midnight, I was bored and turned it off. 2 minutes later, I clearly heard my mom call out my name. Excitedly, I yelled, "Coming, Mom!" I rushed down the stairs and looked around. Then I glanced out of the window, but I couldn't see anyone. Thinking that it was just my imagination, I brushed it off. And since I was downstairs already, I decided to pee. As I was walking to the bathroom, I once again clearly heard my mom's voice calling my name, but this time it came from the left window. I peeked out of the window, but again I saw nothing. Nothing. I realized that my mom couldn't be there, and the window was closed off. I was creeped out, so I decided to go back upstairs. As I was making my way to the stairs, I heard her voice again. This time it was coming from the window beside the stairs. I was so freaked out that I just bolted up the stairs and into my room, locking the door behind me. I then hid under my sheets and eventually fell asleep. My sister had to let my mom in. Apparently, my mom called my phone three times, but I wouldn't wake up, so she called my sister instead. The next morning, I told my mom what had happened. She said if I ever hear it again, I should never answer back, and if I'm not sure if it's her, because it's like inviting the thing into our home. That is scary. Laughing heard at 10. Anonymous. I'm 22 years old. I've lived in the same house my whole life with my mom and 3 brothers. The house is only 45 years old and located within a nice suburban area. It is 2 stories and pretty big, so it has an echo. You're able to hear most of what's going on in the house if your door is open. When I was about 10, I started staying home alone sometimes. One day, I'm home. My mom and little brother were supposed to be back within the next hour or so. I'm in my room, consumed by my book, and was alerted to the sound of someone laughing. I tried to ignore it and kept reading, but then I hear it again. I get up and run to the stairs, excited that my little brother must be back early. I call down, shouting his name. No one answers, so I call out for my mom. It's completely silent. I'm sitting on the stairs looking through the rails at our dining room, feeling confused. I swear I just heard my brother laughing. When I hear it again, a little kid laughing. And it sounds like it's directly coming from the area where I'm looking. was so freaked out, I ran back to my room and tried forgetting about it. Around 6 years later, I'm with my 2 older brothers and I start talking about ghosts. We all get lost in conversation, talking about experiences we have had. When my oldest brother starts telling a story about when he was 10, he was home alone in his room when he heard a little kid laughing. He thought it was me. He ran to the stairs and called out for me. Then he heard the laugh again coming from the dining area. And he's telling me the story. My mouth is wide open as I am in shock. I look at my brother and he looks just as astonished as me. We ended up finding out that we all had experienced the exact same thing at 10 years old whilst being home alone. So shadow people and the Hat Man. Black mass and human-shaped shadows are known as shadow people. Often people catch these in the corner of their eye. Shadow people are associated with the phantom known as the Hat Man. The Hat Man is described as a dense black shadow of a tall male, wearing a hat and sometimes a trench coat. The Hat Man quietly watching over people, mainly whilst they are in bed. Most sightings tend to be in basements or bedrooms throughout the night. Many children who encounter the Hat Man will see him on more than one occasion. There have been known cases of some seeing the Hat Man or a shadow person when in a hostile environment, or just before a death happens within a family. People are unsure if the shadow people and Hat Man are ghosts, aliens, time travelers, demons, or something completely different. Many people first see these shadow figures appearing in dreams and sleep paralysis. They are said to have a sinister presence. It can be a frightening experience for anyone encountering them. I don't know if you have listened to the first one of these recordings or not. Maybe it was the second one, I don't remember. But I was explaining how when I was young, very young, until I was probably 15 or 16, I had night terrors. And these shadow people would be reaching for me as I was wide awake but could not move, with complete paralysis and terror. I knew they were trying to get me, but I didn't dare move or run or cry or anything. I just sat there with sweat pouring down my face. So I know the feeling. The house I left, anonymous. I once rented a house with my husband, and with days of moving in, strange shadows would appear in the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just me and I needed to have my eyes tested. But my husband commented that he saw odd shadows appear too. We both had our eyes checked just to rule it out and added a carbon monoxide monitor to the place. The shadows became braver, I suppose you could say. Sometimes I would wake to see the shadow of a grown man standing in front of the window in my room, as though he were watching me. Things got worse and we would hear voices in the house and loud bangs. It made me really nervous and my anxiety was at an all-time high. My husband tried to shrug everything off but couldn't cope watching my mental health deteriorate. So we moved to another place. Unfortunately, we we ended up paying the remaining 4 months' rent alongside our new place. Both of us borrowed money from our family and worked overtime to pay them back. It was hard work, but much better than living with shadows watching and terrifying me. Shadows whilst in labor. Rose, location Stoke-on-Trent, England. Hospitals are really strange places. I was waiting for my daughter to be born in a very slow labor. I had no medications at this point. I was in my bed. I could hear fast-moving, multiple footsteps and the wheels of a bed moving towards me quickly. I turned to look and saw shadows of people pushing a bed heading down the corridor. When I asked the midwife what happened and who was rushed away, she said no one was there. I told her what I had seen and heard. She asked me to get up and look down the corridor towards the direction I'd just seen the shadows of people and a bed rushing. It was a dead-end corridor. It made my hair stand on end. Shadow glides. Location: Nottinghamshire, England. I was over my mother's house with 2 family members after she had died. The 3 of us were standing in the living room quietly talking. I spotted a shadow in the corner of my eye. As I turned to watch it, I noticed my other 2 family members that I already spotted. This strange, dark mass as it swiftly passed by us. It shot out of the room and we followed it to the hallway. All 3 of us saw it glide upstairs before disappearing. We checked upstairs. There was nothing there. There was nothing in the house to explain the reason behind the strange shadow-like mass, and it seemed likely to be connected to the recent death of my mother. Face to Face Anonymous. I have been seeing shadow people out of the corner of my eye for the past 10 years. A couple of years ago, I was laying in my bed. I turned over to lay on my other side and saw a shadow person. Its body was hard to make out, but its face, which was only a foot away from mine, had been burned into my brain. Its eyes faintly glowed as a ghostly green color, and it had a giant grin with huge dagger-like teeth. I'm terrified I will see this again. Yellow Eyes, Ashley, location Baltimore, Maryland, USA. When I was a kid of maybe 6 or 7, our house was known by everyone who lived there to be rich with paranormal activity. My grandma always told us we had demons in our house, but she called all entities demons. She called them angels when they did something to protect you. I hadn't seen anything before this time, but the house had a weird feeling to it at night. I can't accurately explain it, but I always felt like you were being watched, and if you didn't keep moving, something might grab you. I got up to pee one night, jumped out of bed, jogged to the door of the bedroom, stopped and looked around to make sure nothing was in my way. Before I started running to the bathroom, it was an empty hall with one of the bathroom lights on which lit the whole hallway. I started to run to the bathroom looking at the floor. When I got 2 or 3 feet past the threshold of the bedroom door, I bumped into something. I was surprised and thought to myself, but nothing was there just a second second ago. Maybe I overlooked a chair or something. As I backed up, I saw a shadow figure wearing an open black coat. I couldn't make out any details as everything was like a deep black shadow. I looked further upwards and I saw his mouth slightly opened, snarling to reveal sharp, jagged teeth. His eyes were completely yellow. His body looked wide but not fat. He blocked almost the whole space in which he stood. As I stepped back, his expression became less angry and more neutral. I stared at him the whole time, trying to figure out who was standing in front of me. I compared him to everyone in the house, and he just didn't look like anyone I lived with. He hardly looked human, and in his presence was terrifying. I was curious with the shadow figure, and I felt like running. But I stood and watched him for a moment, and then ran back to bed and peeked over my sleeping sister to see if he followed me. Luckily, he did not. Well, I have enjoyed this time of a reading of odd and bizarre, strange encounters. But they're unexplainable, they're very real. And if you've never experienced a paranormal activity, it is hard to explain. But if you have, it's something you will never forget. I can promise you that. I hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you for subscribing, for liking, for commenting, and for viewing. I appreciate everybody.